Hello, everyone. Welcome to our last session of the day. First off, huge thanks to Rodney, Casimir, and Bill for that awesome presentation, Skaters Hack the World. And one quick housekeeping note as well before I introduce our next speakers. Just a reminder that someone did lose an insulin pen here in main stage earlier today. So if you do find that, please turn that in to someone wearing a purple shirt. Thank you so much. All right, so next up we have a presentation called Champions Playbook, presented by XR industry veterans Shelley Peterson and Tim Ventura. Shelley's a true XR industry pioneer, working in this space since 2001. Her combined skills and decades of experience across the XR industry have resulted in repeated demonstrations of the value of this emerging technology across numerous manufacturing programs, including Lockheed Martin's civil, commercial, and defense space programs. We've also got Tim Ventura, who's been working in this space since 2004, who is a senior sales director of the Americas at HoloLight. Without further ado, please welcome Shelley and Tim for a Champions Playbook.
Thank you.
It's happy hour, and you're here with me. This is great. Appreciate it. So, welcome to a Champions Playbook. Do we have any football fans in the audience? Fantastic. Then I'm right at home here. So, as you can imagine, me being a big football fan, I have a favorite college team. And that college team is the University of Michigan. And when I was growing up, the University of Michigan had one of the best coaches, a guy named Bo Schembechler. He was an animal. He was a champion. He was an innovator. And Bo made Michigan football fun. And my father, every chance he got, was taking us to a Michigan game. And it was always electric. And there's one particular game that sticks in my mind, and I'm going to date myself here a little bit. It's the Michigan State game from 1988. I know I don't look that old. It was an amazing game. We were set to blow out Michigan State. However, that was not the case this day. We found ourselves late in the third quarter, having yet again to punt from inside Michigan State 40-yard line. And this is when Mr. Innovation struck. The ball was snapped. There was all kinds of chaos at the line of scrimmage. And it was as if Mike Gillette, the punter, just disappeared for a few seconds and then randomly appeared down the sidelines, ran 40 yards for a touchdown. Totally changed the dynamic of that game. The crowd went nuts, 106,000 people on their feet. It was absolutely electric. So, fast forward 8 months. Little old me, sitting in a stadium just a little bit smaller than this, waiting for the champion, the innovator, Bo Schembechler, to speak. I could not wait to hear all of these innovative words of wisdom from the great one. And he did not disappoint. About 20 minutes in to this particular event, the moderator brought up that very game, that very play, and asked Bo about his philosophy around innovation. And what he said next stuck with me till today. Bo started out, I do not focus on innovation. For me to solely focus on innovation would leave us exposed. So in my mind, Bo just said, innovation equals risk. That's interesting. And then he went on to drop this nugget. He said, I focus solely on the challenges that I'm going to see from the offense and defense of my opponent. I put the right guys in the right place at the right time to neutralize the opposition. Teamwork is our foundation, but 4 quarters of consistent collaboration wins games. Collaboration wins games. It's interesting because all this time I thought Bo was all about innovation. Turns out that Bo looks at innovation as a byproduct of his process. Totally caught me off guard. Then I got to thinking, this is kind of where we have things backwards a little bit in this industry. We focus way too much on innovation. We overuse, we misuse, and we miscategorize innovation to the point it becomes a detriment to our process. We use that word innovation when we don't understand all the challenges or we don't have all the answers to our solution. We use that word innovation as kind of a fallback in our process. And when you think about it, in this case, innovation does equal risk. It's risk to my budget, it's risk to my adoption, it's risk to my implementation, and it's more importantly, risk to scale. So think about that for a second. So today, we want to focus on collaborating for a win. We're going to leave innovation as a byproduct, and we're going to talk about collaboration-driven solutions. And with that in mind, I'm going to hand it off to Shelley so that she can do a little bit deeper dive into this.
All right, thank you, Tim. Hey, everyone. Hey. So, what is a champion? A champion is someone who ushers a technology into a company. And hopefully the company sees significant value. And when that happens, you feel kind of like this. You feel mildly superhuman. But there's also times where you're going to feel like this. You're juggling 30 things at once. You're dodging lightning bolts. Thanks to AI, you might lose an arm or two. And then there's times where things start to flow smoothly. When that happens, you feel like this guy. You can juggle a million things at once and even have a few, capacity for a few additional things. Now, the truth is a champion's going to toggle back and forth between all three of these, sometimes within the same day. But that's what keeps it interesting. Now, don't worry, we're not going to go through all of these topics, but it's important to remember that a champion has quite a bit to keep in mind and quite a bit to manage. We're going to go through a few things that work well, a few things that you want to avoid, and a few stories in this time frame. So if there's one thing I can have you take away from this, it's that you need to have lots of organizations involved and work with those organizations, both internally, like IT and security and your engineering organizations, and externally, like your tech partners, to focus on the solutions. And that solution-driven collaboration enables your collaboration-driven solutions. That's where you see the value, okay? Now, you also want to address the hippos. Does anyone know what a hippo is? Anyone? This is your highest paid person's opinion. Anyone know what we're talking about here? Anyone experience it? So this person, don't get me wrong, we need their inputs. But if they're making every decision, you have a challenge because your creative thinkers will stop contributing. So keep your hippos in check. Now, before I started at Lockheed, I owned a small business, and we worked on a multispectral monocular for special ops. And that was an incredibly valuable experience because it taught me to think like an entrepreneur. And it was about 2 years ago I heard the term intrapreneur, a person who builds a company within a company, which is essentially like your champion in the XR industry space. When these two work together, it works really well. So that's where I'm talking about a champion and a tech partner who are working together to bring solutions forward. Another challenge that an entrepreneur has is finding resources at the start. I get this question all the time from organizations who are wanting to get started more efficiently. One of the challenges is that the validation of a technology requires resources, but obtaining resources requires validation of the technology. So how do you break out of this chicken and egg scenario, right? Is there anyone here who's experienced this? It's a real thing. Yes, it's a real thing. One of the things that you can do at the start is to create a sense of urgency. You want to pull your teams together to focus on the solution and identify what's the value. what's being optimized. Work with your end users to specify how it's going to change the way they do work. What's the impact if you don't proceed? These days, you can point to competitors who are using the technology and show that you're at risk if you don't proceed, if they're using the technology. We want to look at return on investment, but we also want to look at effort. How are we applying effort? I like to see effort applied efficiently. You know, the effort, the resulting value, and then in terms of productivity. So we've seen these graphs in terms of ROI, but we can also look at it for effort, where that crossover point at the bottom, where the green goes back into the positive state, we want to move that left. Okay, if we can do that, we're more likely to get solid funding sooner. It aligns better if we can move that left. Another thing we do is we think of applying more effort to be more productive. I like to think of how do you apply less effort to be more productive. There should be a way to do that, right? Basically take high effort, low value and turn it into low effort, high value. Now, you can tell from these pictures, I'm not a fan of crawl, walk, run. We spend too much time, we use it as a fallback in that crawl state. We spend too much time in a proof of concept. I was talking just earlier about let's just skip proof of concept altogether and go into the next phase in some cases. It's nice when you can do that, but we want to skip the excessive recurring meetings. Make sure that your meetings are set up to be effective and have the right people in them. Another thing that can take, we have good intentions when we set up the way we're going to status, but then we status way too much and we have to do that recurring over time. Be careful how you set these things up because they can tank your productivity. Now, yes, correct response. So we've seen groups that deploy Agile, and the first thing they do is they go in and they set up daily scrums when daily scrums aren't needed. And they'll set up a point system to motivate colleagues who are already plenty motivated to begin with. Okay, you can really drag things down by doing this. Groups ask what we would run, and I'm not sure there's a specific process to tell you because we customized it to what was needed by the teams. Optimization black belts came in and studied what we did, and they said it was kind of like a Kanban without the Kanban board, but kind of migrated with other things. If you look up Kelly Johnson's 14 rules, I personally think that that's the closest to what we would run. It's basically just running very efficiently. He used a tenth of the people to do the same job. That's kind of what we did. You also want to create a roadmap on a timeline, and here's why. If you set up a roadmap, especially with XR technology, and state what you're going to do, and then follow your schedule, on schedule, within budget, your leadership will start to notice what you're doing, and they will throw money at you, hopefully. These red diamonds at the end that we think of as milestones, I like to think of those as gates. It's not something that ends, it's leading to another activity or another access or the thing that is next. A story on this one. Years ago, there was a funding source, and they were notorious for turning on funding late. So a period of performance that would go from January 1st to December 31st, but they would turn on funding in April or June or July. So I went back in and said, if you can give us funding, if you can turn it on January 4th, instead of 5 deliverables, we'll give you 17. They said, we don't normally do that, but if you're going to do that, we'll turn it on July 4th or January 4th. So we were postured, we were ready, we had all of our organizations ready to go. We flew down to a NASA facility, ran an activity, flew back home, ran the analytics within 2 days. And I was able to pick up the phone and call them and say, okay, we just finished our first deliverable. We did it early, so I'm giving you $80K back. And they tossed it back at me and said, give us more deliverables. So that year, instead of 5 or 17 deliverables, we delivered 25. And you can do this if you have the teams collaborating and working together and moving forward. Now, you also want to build for long-term success. Does anyone here have their IT or security person with them at this event? Anyone? Yeah, okay. So, come by later. Coffee or a beer. I owe you guys a coffee or a beer. These guys are our superheroes, and having them involved early is influential for what you want to do. We need them involved, and we need them involved in the early phases. I'm not kidding that I brought them in on day one to our organization. If you haven't done it on day one, it's not too late. Bring them in, get them involved. And also remember that tech partners are your best allies. And here's an example of that. If you've heard me talk in the past, you've heard me talk about the click bond use case. Okay, that's the one where we save 93% touch labor, so 8 hours and 45 minutes. That organization was saving about $40 per fastener, and they purchase about 2 million fasteners per year, so fantastic ROI. But even with that wonderful ROI, I knew that there were areas where we could save additional time, provide additional value in the workflow. And instead of trying to figure out how to solve that completely on our own, we teamed up with our tech partners and we said, okay, here's 4 things that we need to solve. One is connectivity. IT had told us, and security had said, no connectivity. But when we peeled the layers, what they really meant was no Wi-Fi, no Bluetooth. So is there a way that we can provide connectivity back in? Another thing that we knew was that buy-offs are tedious. There should be a better way to go about that. End of a work instruction step, they buy off the step. It was a little bit clunky, and there's a better way to do that. We knew that we could speed up the workflow. So how do we go about that? And then device information security. If a device walks off of a defense program, especially if it's malicious intent or otherwise, we have rich data on that device, and we don't want that data getting into the wrong hands. So how do we go about providing improved device information security? So with that, I'm going to bring Tim back on to walk us through how they handled that challenge as a tech partner that we were teamed up with.
Thank you. So first of all, I absolutely love the ClickBond case. I think it's a tremendous opportunity from a collaboration standpoint. And I also think there's some very unique challenges with this particular case in the gate that she wants to pass through. It being an RF restricted environment, meaning no Wi-Fi, no connectivity, makes it extremely difficult. And I would be willing to say that if you can solve a challenge like this in this type of environment, you can probably solve it just about anywhere. So let's just recap really quick. Connectivity was a big issue. The optimized buy-offs was extremely important to her process. The speed of the overall process of building those work instructions, she wanted to shrink that a little bit. And then, of course, that device security aspect. So this is what that process timeline looks like as it sits in the current state, and she wants to pass through this next gate. So we're going to be making some huge changes here, and so I think the first thing we need to do is bring in the IT and security gods. Now, I call them gods, she calls them superheroes. They're their gods, because at the end of the day, they are a great enabler or a great disabler of anything we're trying to do in this environment. So we need to glue ourselves to their hip if we can, find a good one, and really work very closely with them from that standpoint. So the big issue here is connectivity, so we're going to solve for that one first. So we're going to get with a tech partner, and we're going to bring in a solution called Li-Fi. And what Li-Fi is we're going to transfer data to and from our server through modulated light from a light bulb right above us. Now, I know I saw a couple of faces here. I'm not smoking the drapes. This does exist. So this is our solution. The reason being is that there is absolutely no bleed through. So it is point to point, and it meets our particular security requirements for this particular application. So now that we have connectivity, now it starts to get fun. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start with those buy-offs. That's a very manual, laborious process. They've got to step in and out of the area multiple times to buy off on this particular product. We're going to build it right directly into the work instruction. So we're immediately going to shrink that particular cycle there. Now, the next thing is, how many people absolutely love taking gorgeous high-fidelity models and reducing them down to low-fidelity block art to push it to your device? I know I don't. So we're going to get rid of decimation right off the bat, take it completely out of the equation. And now we've shortened that a complete process. However, we have created a very heavy process from a data standpoint. So now we're going to wrap that process. We're going to either server-side render or GovCloud side render for this particular case. And we're going to stream it directly to the device. To and from the device, two-way communication. And what's nice about this is that model size doesn't matter, but we've solved that last problem in the equation, which is the device walking off with our data on it. We're going to use that device as a viewer, and it's just viewing the data that is on our server or on our GovCloud instance. So let's just recap really quick. Connectivity, we solved that with Li-Fi. Optimized buy-offs, we cut that process down 90%. The speed and efficiency with building that actual process now, we've saved 30 to 35% by getting rid of decimation. So we've sped that whole process up. And then finally, the device-related security through XR streaming. Now let's just take a look at this shortened process. A lot of efficiencies brought in, but the gate, we've already kicked it wide open. We have connectivity. This is the click bond use case. It is a bonded fastener. So the environmental controls are very important in this particular application. So we want to understand maybe surface temperature of the product, humidity, ambient temperature. Let's stream that right in there. The door's wide open. Why not? It's a bonded nut plate. So why don't we bring in tools? Let's bring in Bluetooth connected tools now, or connected tools, and let's get running torque, final torque. Let's give them a green light in the work instructions that everything is good to go. We've got the door wide open. Why not talk to the QA/QC department while we're in this process? Why not ask our manager for approval on certain things? It opens the door wide open in this particular process. So when you sit down and think about this, there's no Staples easy button for a project like this. There is no single point solution for a big, huge challenge like this. It all comes down to collaboration. It all comes down to collaboration-driven solutions. And with that in mind, I'd like to bring Shelley back up on stage, and we'd love to open it up for questions.
All right.
I'll hold it.
Any
I
questions?
didn't do that good of explaining it, so I mean, there's got to be a few questions somewhere.
I think everybody's ready for a happy hour. What do y'all think? Any questions? Yes.
What environmental factors have the potential to disrupt the Wi-Fi connection?
Okay, the question is, what environmental factors have the potential to disrupt the Wi-Fi connection?
Well, that's a good question. So it's a point-to-point solution. So imagine a dome of light over top of your project or over top of you as you're working. If you were to step outside of that dome, you're going to lose the signal. So if you had any obstructions in the way, you would lose the signal. So there are some limitations with Wi-Fi, but there's also ways of setting that system up to minimize those interactions or minimize those risks. So good question, though. Thank you.
I'll come to Mike, I guess.
Sure.
Yeah, I was just curious broadly for any new technology that a company's trying to absorb into their organization, where do they mostly go wrong? Or like, are there any sort of key, sort of consistent errors that you see happen?
I think the biggest thing where we go wrong is not getting involved with IT and security early enough. It's critical. I mean, they have that big red rubber stamp no ready to go with any of your ideas, so you got to get in with them as soon as possible, spend as much time with them, and that's where I feel it's the biggest risk, biggest challenge. How about you?
I'll echo that. You know, having way back on day one when the VP asked me to look at getting technology out onto a spacecraft shop floor where you couldn't even take your key fob We said, who's the highest level IT and security person that you know? And what can you do to twist their arm to help us? And he gave us a good person, and that was instrumental. Also, having funding that aligns to your objectives. Not all funding is good funding. In this, you think of it like an investor for a business. You want to make sure they're aligned with your objectives. If you have funding that leads you down the wrong path, the wrong requirements, you hit a dead end and you almost have to back out and get on another track. So you want to make sure that you're aligned well with the funding and the objectives that you're trying to meet and that they're trying to meet as well.
I have a question about some of your slides were showing a lot of corporate process.
Okay.
And in the XR space, there are a lot of startups that are creative agencies or they are not coming from a corporate background. So I'm wondering, are these processes things that you think that startups would be more successful with if they use these? And obviously it would help them get bigger clients, get, speak the language of corporate customers. But I see that corporate background, and I'm seeing it as something that a lot of startups don't have in XR.
So
Can you comment on that?
It's that motherhood element, right? It's the things that we know we need to do. And in large organizations, you need to do some of these things or something close to it in order to move effectively. And in a startup, you're moving completely differently. I mean, when I was an entrepreneur, we were going on a completely different speed and path than these large corporate organizations. Having knowledge of both is very helpful. So I would say for an entrepreneur to be able to understand how that corporation is going to move, where there's flexibility to speed things up some, and where you have to follow the process is good knowledge. And then sometimes our tech partners would come in and go, hey, if we do this thing over here, can we skip some of that process or accomplish it a different way? And that helped us to accelerate something. So I also think that startups can bring ideas that help break through some of that corporate process. But in general, you want to set up to move efficiently, focus on the value, work within schedule, within budget to provide value. And if we can do that, it smooths things out a lot.
I don't know about you guys, but I see a podcast brewing here between the two. I think this is a first off, right?
Listen, I'll give you your 100 in a minute.
All right. You obviously made a great point about collaboration, a success, and you knocked it out of the park. But what are your observations on the industry in general in terms of collaboration? What are you seeing? What's your ask?
On whether it's there or not, or on what part of the industry in collaboration?
What are the trends you're seeing that are holding the industry back in general?
Boy, it's a good question, Dave. I see the hesitation a lot about exploring different opportunities or different options in the technology space. Most folks that start out, they don't really quite grab all of the challenges that fall into place on a shop floor, for example. And so they maybe innovate, pardon that word, in a bubble, and then they end up falling short in that whole process. And then there's no willingness to step outside and grab a third party to help you, or a champion to guide you to somebody else. So, I just think it comes down to the relationships in the collaboration side of things, because there is no single point solution for a lot of the things that we get involved in.
Yeah. At this event, you see people who have been here for a long time. And it's almost like a homecoming, right? You see people that you've known for a long time. And it's working with those groups over time and communicating with them and collaborating with them. When you see that taking place, you know that some successful things are happening. For the groups who are not doing that, there's exceptions to the rule, but it's probably not going to be as successful, in my opinion. But that's what's fun about this event, if you get to come and collaborate with all the different groups in one place.
Any other questions?
Okay.
Thank
Hope to
you.
see you guys at happy
Appreciate
hour
it.
here in just a little bit.
Yes.
Thanks for staying here late with us.